Hello, and welcome to Our Power is Within. I'm your host, Chasmith, aka Just Chaz, and I am on a mission to inspire people to take their power back and help people to realize that each and every one of us has a healer within our own self. When we can create an environment that supports healing and get out of our own way, we are truly capable of healing in mind, body, and soul. Whether you've been following along this whole time or if it is your first episode, thank you for being on this journey with me. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. And if you feel called to help me spread this message of empowerment, healing, and possibility, please consider leaving a review on Apple Podcast, a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, if and only if I've earned it, and or sharing your favorite episode on social media and tagging me at Our Power is Within. So how was last week's challenge, the Be Here Now challenge? What was your favorite part? Did you remember to make that time for yourselves, that 60 seconds per day? Our challenge this week is going to be a little different and a little the same. That sounds funny, but yeah. This week, I believe in the end, it will still be a way to be totally present, but we're going to approach it more subtly. Okay, so this week, my challenge is for us to pick out one song that we all that makes us feel good. And I believe we all have like that one song that just makes us feel really good no matter what kind of mood we're in, right? So pick that song out and then every day play that song at least one time for yourself. And when you play it, listen to it. Maybe sing with it, maybe dance with it, or maybe just sit there and just breathe and be with it. Check in with yourself each day and see what you need most. Maybe one day you need to dance. Maybe another day it feels more supportive to just breathe. And that's the beauty of it all, that we can do whatever supports us best in each moment of time. And I would love to hear what song you end up choosing. So shoot me a DM and share it if you feel called to do so. In today's episode, we actually talk about music, singing, dancing, and so much more with our guest, Christina Choy. Christina considers herself to now be in a recovery phase of her journey after what she calls a very twisty-turny path. She shares all of this with us and so much more. We talk about how to weave different tools into our healing journey and figuring out what will best support each of us in each moment. We do talk a lot about brain rewiring and specifically some terms from the DNRS brain rewiring program by Annie Hopper. If brain retraining is something that piques your curiosity, I will leave a link in the show notes for my favorite flexible brain retraining program by Lindsay Mitchell called Vital Side. If you haven't listened to episode number 9 with Lindsay, it's a really great one to go back and give a listen. So anyhow, we do talk about rounds. And for anyone listening who isn't familiar with DNRS, the easiest way to understand a round is to just imagine having a short chat with your brain and then doing your own guided visualization. We also mention a term called POPs. And this is simply an acronym for pathways of our past. Also can be known as limiting beliefs, mental loops, or any rumination patterns. So I think I've covered the basics. If you have any other questions as you listen along, of course, please do not hesitate to shoot me a message and just ask me. I love connecting. And P.S., for anyone who's listening who might be thinking, oh, maybe this is what I'm missing, or that's what I'm missing, or, well, I'm already doing this or that, but I might need that instead. Just remember, there is no magic perfect solution, and it's not always about trying everything. Sometimes it's about sticking with something and then allowing yourself to be led by those intuitive nudges as you start to connect with that inner guidance that has always been there. It's discerning between the limbic brain speaking and our outer knowing, and then trusting along the way. This might be hard to distinguish early on, but I promise over time that we're all able to determine the difference. So maybe brain retraining is right for you. Maybe what you're doing is already right. I can't decide that, only you can. But my goal is in all of this to definitely expand possibilities, to share beautiful testimonials like Christina's, who uses so many different tools weaved together and has different experiences from the next person and the next person and the next person. But if you're somebody that finds themselves always trying the next thing, thinking, oh, maybe this is going to be it, oh, maybe that's going to be it, I encourage you to just maybe sit with one thing. I've been there. I wanted to try all of it. And I realized very quickly that I was in this like fix it mode, this fix it mindset. And I just don't think I'm broken. And I don't think anyone listening is broken. I think we're all complete, but not finished. And I think we're all whole. And I think we're already all okay. I just think that we have this beautiful opportunity, brilliantly disguised. And it's an opportunity for us to expand and transform and grow and heal from the inside out. So I'm probably rambling at this point, but I did write a blog, and it was just published last week. And it was all about this very topic of trusting that we're not broken, that we're already complete and whole. And if you want to read it, I will have a link for that in the show notes as well. With that said, I think it's time to go ahead and welcome Christina to the show. Hey, Christina, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. I'm really excited to have you here and finally have this chat together.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I absolutely love sharing anything and everything that could be helpful to someone else in their journey. It's such a rewarding thing to be able to do.
Yeah, it's awesome. I've watched some of your videos on YouTube too, and I really love your energy. It's always enthusiastic and supportive, and it's very inspiring. So I feel like this will be a great chat for anyone out there listening to bring some inspiration and light into their life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So maybe you could kind of give a brief background and just share with people a little bit about yourself and what you've been through, what journey you're on, so that they kind of have an idea of where you're at and where you came from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started DNRS a little over 4 years ago. And at that point I had, kind of the normal slew of physical and psychological symptoms, just what I consider like a normal textbook kind of smattering of things, probably a good 10 to 15 different things going on. And I worked the DNRS program for 3 years and kind of slowly weaned my way off of that into just like a maintenance practice of meditation and so forth. And during that time, there was a lot of twists and turns to my journey. And I had my home, I've got 5 kids, and working with the intensity of my journey is, I would say, in like the higher percentiles. Like I've not met a lot of people whose journeys have been as intense as mine. So I needed to step away from my family in practice a number of times to really give myself the space to heal. And I had, a number of kind of re-injury, relapse, reactivation type things happen at different points, because one of my biggest patterns was that I would try to push myself really hard to heal for my family and get back to my family, and all that did was just reactivate me. So I learned that's a part of where, my whole philosophy of healing is that one of the things I learned in the journey is that it's spontaneous. We do the work we need to do to align our limbic system and our nervous system to heal. But then the actual process of healing itself is spontaneous, and it can't be forced and it can't be pushed. And realizing that was a huge relief. It took a lot of courage to accept that and realize that and be like, oh, okay. So really what I'm doing here is I'm cooperating with how my body and brain are designed to work, and I'm putting them into a healing state. And then I'm just kind of letting the magic happen, and I'm not trying to make any particular outcomes occur. I'm just enjoying, my main job is to enjoy the ride, because being in that rest and digest, relaxed state is the most healing thing I could do. That was definitely a big shift. I would say that probably occurred probably after recovery, honestly, because the last year I've had more life things come up. And so I've still been in my own kind of maintenance, moving forward process. But that, I think, is one of the biggest things that I would want to share with anyone in the process of healing, is to remember that healing is always spontaneous, that brain healing is no different from healing from a scratch or a cut or a broken bone, that it is different because it's our brain we're using to heal. And so a lot of times when we start off, we are not understanding the process fully. So and that's another thing, like realizing that automating the process itself, especially when it comes to brain retraining, is a big part of recovery. That just getting in the groove and making it a habit to catch pops and to, use your tools at the right times and learning how to do that. There's a learning curve because the brain is impaired and it's the thing we're using to heal. There's a learning curve for how to use the tools and how to understand what it is you're doing. And that's one thing that I think of as a very comforting thing, because a lot of times people will come to me and ask me, oh, well, I've been doing DNRS this long and I haven't seen the physical shifts I want yet. And a lot of times I'm like, well, that makes sense. It takes time for your brain to get complete. It takes, a lot of people about 6 to 12 months to get really good at the process. And then that's when your brain's in dose all the time. And that's when the physical healing starts to happen. So just really accepting that it's a spontaneous thing and you don't have to force it, and you can relax into it and focus more on learning the process and enjoying the process than anything else. And that actually leads to all the wonderful benefits that we want faster. Again, there's a great freedom and acceptance. It just takes a lot of courage and a lot of guts. So that's, and again, the kind of curly cue of my windy recovery taught me that too, that, you can try as hard as you want for something, but if you're trying in the wrong way, especially again, when it comes to healing, it can't be forced. So surrendering to the process of how healing actually works is always going to be the fastest way forward. So yeah, it's a process of maturing, because we've got to accept the things that we can't change so that we can change the things that we can, So yeah, and then after recovery, I stopped doing DNRS about December of 2019. And then I've just, moved into more of a maintenance, more holistic kind of practice of moving forward, using meditation and dance and movement and music and somatics and my own version of somatics. I've used a lot of different tools in my journey, but most of it was stuff I just stumbled across by following my intuition. So I haven't really studied or specifically learned a lot of different things. I've just incorporated the knowledge I do have into my practice and follow my intuition and figuring out what works. Because that's my one big rule is, if it works, do it, because the point is to recover. So that's kind of been my journey the last year, has been just, changing my practice and changing my lifestyle to nourish me where I'm at and help keep me moving forward, because that's the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've never heard this explained this way. And I really like that, because I think I do notice and feel that, like, it can be really easy sometimes to kind of fall into that trap of feeling like you are trying so hard, but then you're not really supposed to be trying so hard. You're just creating these habits, these positive, healthy habits. And I love how you said you're basically putting yourself into a healing state and then enjoy the ride.
Exactly. And I like that you use the word habits, because that has been, that was the aha moment I had at some point. I've let go of time so much that I can't remember when I have these aha moments, but realizing like, oh, recovery is really just a habit. It's just a set of really positive habits, because we're always, and realizing, okay, I can never control what life's going to throw at me. I can never control what even my limbic system is going to throw at me, or what's going to happen in my life. But getting in a habit of taking an empowered stance, getting in a habit of, being a curious observer and recognizing what's going on, and then taking action as quickly as you can on what the actual thing is that you need to move forward. Because there's always a temptation to try to control outcomes or make ourselves, in my experience at least, there's a temptation to save face and try to do something that looks good and looks responsible. But a lot of times when you're recovering, you need space, you need healing, you need downtime, you need rest, and it can look and feel very irresponsible. So, actually addressing, getting in that habit though, of like being, okay, what does that actually need to do? And caring more about that than what it looks like to other people. That's a big part of it too.
Oh my gosh, that's such a huge part. Yeah. Yeah, because I know in my own experience, like there's been so many times where when people like connect with you or reach out to you, and then they want to like know what's going on or what you're up to. And there's almost, I know in my past, I've almost had these feelings of like shame, because I felt like I was like what I was doing, which was just in my head, it was like I was dismissing or downplaying what I was actually doing, because I wasn't, maybe doing these certain jobs or having these other outward accomplishments,
Exactly. Yeah. And that's definitely a big, I realized this too. I think it was about last September or so, about 6 months ago, I realized that one of the parts of healing, and it's a very profoundly healing thing to do, is to own your story and own your journey and to own your truth. And I come from a background where I was raised very, very devout Catholic, and the idea that there is such thing as a personal truth is very not acceptable in that philosophy. But I was like, oh, hold on. Okay, I understand, looking at my journey scientifically, looking at my brain and my life experience and realizing, okay, I never even knew, I had no idea. Like for me and a lot of the people that I work with, we come from a background of never having known healthy brain function. And that's very different than other people's lives. And owning that and saying, okay, well, I never had the same foundation, and not in a victimhood way, but just a this is what is kind of way. I've never had the same foundation. It's completely unreasonable to expect me to be able to do things I literally don't have the framework for in my brain and body. And accepting, okay, whatever your unique journey is, owning it. And being like, yeah, I'm doing the right thing for me. The most responsible thing for me to do is go lay in a hammock for 20 minutes instead of making dinner, or letting dinner be 20 minutes late because I need to go lay in a hammock for 20 minutes and just relax. And it's little things like that. And also looking at your journey and saying, yeah, this is where I'm at in my life. Like part of my journey. Because for a lot of us, part of the journey it feels like, or is very much a self-parenting. You're kind of reparenting yourself and growing up in certain ways for the first time. And that can feel embarrassing when you're doing that as a full-fledged adult. And a lot of people who go through, there's a significant percentage of people going through this process who are in their 50s, because it's after, everything's calmed down, that a lot of times the perfect storm happens, like kind of the big things of life, raising kids, having a career. Once that stuff starts to simmer down, a lot of times that's when the system kind of falls apart. And it's objectively, in a way, embarrassing to be like, here I am, a fully grown adult who's already done a lot of big life things, and I'm growing up now? Really? But owning that and recognizing that it couldn't be another way, and that there's no shame in that. Like, if you weren't given the opportunity neurologically to have a healthy childhood for whatever reason, there's no reason we should feel shame about that. What is, and accepting it and owning it and making peace with yourself and where you're at in your life and what that looks like, that's part of growing up, and it's also just really, really healing, because then we no longer feel that shame. We no longer get that chemistry of shame or guilt or the pressure to perform for other people and have our lives or our lifestyle or our self look a particular way that society would say is successful or healed or whatever those concepts are, and saying, no, that's up for me to decide. And that's another thing too, I always encourage people, is that all these things, all the programs and all the tools are out there. They're there to serve you, but only the individual can know what they need, because you're the one inside of that body, that nervous system, that brain. So you know what moves you towards equilibrium, and you know what doesn't work for you. And you're the only person who's on the inside knowing what's working and what's not. So encouraging people to realize, like, you're your only authority when it comes to your recovery, because you're the only person inside of that brain and body. And own that and take that responsibility. And that's really what this is about, is being like, I deserve to heal. I deserve to live a full life. This has nothing to do with my family or whatever, or the other people. As much as I love them, it's not for them, it's for me. And when I heal, it's going to benefit everyone. But reversing that order.
Yes. Thank you so much for saying that. It's so true. We are our own authority. And I know that it can be so easy sometimes to feel like lost, and I think sometimes we might, be in the place in a journey where we've lost connection with that intuition, with that inner authority. And I know for me, I feel like part of this experience of rewiring has been coming back into that place of having a relationship with my intuition, feeling that inner authority working again, feeling it, maybe in a way I never had before.
Yes. And such a good feeling.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, because I feel like something that can happen to some of us when we have, when we are dealing with like years of chronic pain or chronic illness, and if we have disconnected from that, is we're constantly seeking the approval or the answers or the advice from everyone else. We've gotten used to going to like doctors and having them tell us exactly what we need to do. And then we can get so caught up in that, like needing to have everyone else tell us. And it's like, when you really can find that space of stillness and quietness and go within, it's like, oh my gosh, the inner wisdom is there for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing too, like in the last layer that came up for me, and the reason I had such a twisty journey, and I didn't realize this till recently, is that, and this may be, I I think I saw that you interviewed another friend of mine, Kathleen King, recently on here, and she and I have had a conversation about this, about the fawn response, and how that's also a trauma response of fawning over others and making other people the center of your life instead of your own self, and having, being your own person amongst people, having other people and their opinions take up so much more real estate in our mind instead of our own inner knowing of what's right for us. And it's a trauma response, the same as fight, flight, or freeze. And that understanding was a huge aha moment for me, because there was a lot of limbic activity and stress chemistry in the background, even after recovery, that I couldn't quite pin down and couldn't quite get a handle on. Like, I kind of got it, down to a manageable level, but it wasn't gone. And until I started addressing the fawn response as an actual trauma response, that's when things really started to shift there, because I realized, like, all of this outsourcing of my authority is it's all part of the same thing. And it's just like you would, redirect a fight or a flight response, redirecting that fawn response as exactly the same thing is key. And I think for a lot of us, again, if you don't categorize it correctly, you don't realize, this is just a trauma response, just like the other ones. It can feel like something else, and it can become like anything if we don't kind of put it under that this is just my brain category. It tends to get bigger and feel overwhelming. So yeah, that's definitely been a really, really big game changer, and something that I do the best I can to talk about more, and bring that awareness, because I only learned that in December of last year, and I was like, why wasn't I told this sooner? This would have been really helpful information, because it's just a matter of like categorizing those responses in the right way that led to so much healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, actually, I didn't even know what fawning was. I don't know that I even ever heard that term.
Yeah. Like,
yeah, that's new for me.
Yeah. It's just that codependency and the realize, like, I think I used to think when I heard codependency, like romantic relationships and so forth, but it's really more like when you go about your day, making other people's needs or preferences higher than your own basic needs, and having that sense of pressure that if I don't take care of other people first, I'm gonna lose something big. And a lot of times there's almost a feeling of like, I'm gonna lose my place in the tribe. I'm gonna get kicked out, and I'm doomed if I don't do the right things. It's just like with any other trauma response. There's a feeling of like the end of the world being imminent if you don't conform to that behavior of pleasing other people and making sure their needs are met before your own. And obviously, when we're in recovery, if you're in the habit of meeting other people's needs before your own, or if when you put your own needs first, you experience a tremendous amount of guilt and fear and shame, you're not going to be able to heal. So that's really what codependency is. It's not even about any specific relationship. It's more about how you relate to other people, how your limbic system and your survival center relates to other people from the inside, and the chemistry that produces in your body.
Yeah, totally. So interesting. And it's so interesting too that like you learn this, even post recovery in a sense.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show that like there's never an end to this journey. It's just this one continuous journey until our last breath is how I like to think of it. And there's always new layers that we get to peel back or discover or unfold.
Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And it's because if there was nothing new left to do or accomplish, then there wouldn't be much point to being alive. There's always something, because there's always such growth and such richness to life added every time you work through a layer. It's like you gain that much more richness and peace and confidence and clarity in your life as a whole. So I think it's really, it's a beautiful and wonderful and almost a relief to know that, okay, the journey doesn't end. Like there's always going to be new wonderful things to discover. There'll be new things to peel back, as you say, and new like dimensions added to life because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a fun, it's all about, for me, what I've learned, it's all about how we approach it, because, and I think this kind of goes to what you were saying earlier about trying, like you could try and try and try as hard as you want, but that's not the way it works. And I notice like a lot of times if we're trying, we're trying really hard to have this outcome. There's probably this expectation of what that outcome needs to look and feel like.
Yes.
Which can lead to letdown. And it can just make the whole journey and the whole experience feel so much more stressful and so much more like work, versus if you can adopt that mindset. if you can adopt the mindset, like the way you just described it, and then look at it like, I'm on this lifelong journey, and how awesome and beautiful is it that I get to constantly peel back new layers and have new discoveries. And you can almost make it like it's this really fun, beautiful experience and take the work out of it.
Yeah, I agree completely. It just becomes an adventure, because ultimately the truth is that as we heal, we're constantly moving into new territory, and it's unfamiliar. And as you put, like, you can't know what's going to happen. It's impossible to know. The idea that we know what healing is going to look like is in itself kind of a silly illusion to think we know. Again, if we're never gone through the process and we're in this process of healing, it's like, who knows? But you know it's going to be good, but you don't know what it's going to look like. And just getting it, because you're moving into this unfamiliar territory. It's, I think, creating a relationship with the unknown that's one of trust and excitement, of seeing it as an adventure instead of as this scary thing or as something you need to try to control or manage, seeing it as like a wonderful adventure where you'll have amazing experiences and get to live your own, like, kind of Lord of the Rings type of journey. Like, you're going to get to have your whole journey, like you get to be the hero on that mythic journey of your own. And because that's one of the things that the limbic system in its survival, ways, it has trouble with is accepting the unknown. That relationship to the unknown is like a hinge or a crux. That's such an important aspect of recovery, just making that a positive association, making it this wonderful, almost like romance with the unknown, so that the process can be fun and can be an adventure instead of it feeling constricting because we're trying to control an outcome or look for something in particular.
Yes. I like that. Okay, so speaking of this adventure, this hero's journey, you said that your story is very twisty-turny.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Okay, so about twisty-turny. So about the first 4 months, and I still don't understand how this happened, but the first 4 months of my recovery, I was able to attain really, really high levels of bliss and high levels of dose. Really, I accessed insanely and profound levels of dose chemistry in all of my rounds. And I think part of it was because my ITs were so intense that I had to stay focused literally 24/7. And if I did, I could function. Like, I wasn't where, it was like there was a separation between, the ITs were far enough away that they didn't get to me. They weren't like hooking in. And so I was able to go about my day and enjoy it. And I was able to and I had, again, the 5 kids, and I wanted more than anything to be able to be with them again. And I couldn't really take care of them before I started. So I also love walking. I love going outside, and I couldn't really walk before I started. So I was super, super motivated. And when I discovered the superpower of really intense focus on, the sunlight and the trees and the music and my rounds and so forth, on the imagery, and I could kind of find a way around the ITs that were trying to pull me away from those positive experiences. And I kept breaking free, and over again, having these big breaking free moments of getting more and more distance until it didn't matter how intense the ITs were. I still didn't care. It didn't bother me, and they didn't stop me from doing anything. And that was obviously an incredible experience. And then but part of it, again, that whole fawn response thing was still there, and this very deeply held belief I had that, my existence was here to serve other people. And so that was what I did. I went back to working with my kids and doing, the laundry and cooking and taking care of my kids. And I went from not really walking to walking 4 miles a day and doing the grocery shopping and like all of this in a matter of a few months. And as I've learned, it doesn't matter how much dose you're in, you still have to increase your load incrementally. That I learned later on in the journey. So I think I was increasing my load too quickly, and I was doing it because I believed that my purpose in life was to serve other people and not to be my own person. So it all kind of fell down when I organized this big family reunion for my whole extended family, and did like a lot of the cooking and the shopping for it. And it was like a week-long thing, organizing and getting, renting places. And it was a lot. And I still had my own 5 children I was taking care of at the same time. So it was just a lot. This was like 4 months into my recovery. So it was just a way too much too soon. And my brain was like, okay, we got to pull the plug on this girl because she's not going to stop. And this is not okay. Like, this is not safe. It's too much. And so I started, like, my brain became, it turned everything around and made like DNRS and mood elevation and dose chemistry the enemy. And that's a really interesting experience to have because everything that worked literally started having the opposite effect. Like, positivity became the most triggering thing. Rounds were insanely triggering. Mood elevation was a no-go. So it was really, really, really intense. And my brain just wouldn't produce dose for about 6 months. So I slid, it was like I made all this progress, and then I just kind of slid into this like primordial ooze space where it was like I lost all my higher brain function. It was just ugly. And I didn't know what to do other than keep, eventually I kept trying. It was like, this worked the first time, it's going to work again if I just keep going at it. And I was still nursing my twins at the time. Once I weaned them, the dose started kind of coming back in little like 5-second blips, but it was like, that was more than I had in 6 months. So I was like, yes, we're getting somewhere. So I just kept going with it. And it was really difficult, but I was like, if I pursue joy, eventually I'm going to get back to reality. I'm going to get my brain back. And after about 15 months, so that would happen in July. And then next October, I got my prefrontal cortex function back. So it was 15 months of life with no prefrontal cortex, which is a very weird experience. It was difficult. It was not a fun time in life, but I did it. I got back and I found my prefrontal cortex again. But then once I kind of had that back on, my limbic system just kind of, and I did the same thing where I was like, oh, I'm so much better. And I dived right back into, do from just focusing on recovery to like full on parental responsibilities. I did it all over again. I just didn't learn my lesson. So after I did that, I kind of had another like relapse, so to speak, right after and there was like a 2-month span between when I got out of there and I had another relapse because I pushed myself way too hard. So then I spent another about 6 months, but this time, I was about 2 years into my journey. I had a mentor and she was like, Christina, you can just focus on recovery and then you like get back to your family once you're recovered. And I was like, oh, that actually sounds like it would work. Like, this is just like I've been at this for 2 years and it works, but then I keep sabotaging myself unintentionally. So I was like, that sounds great. I'll just do the recovery thing for a while and then I'll get back to family, incrementally as I'm doing better. And just switch the priorities in my mind. And then about 3 months later, I hit my first level of recovery because I was actually putting self-love first and putting myself first for the first time ever. And that felt really good. And there's still been a couple of other things, so that was like, I started really kind of incrementally making my way to full recovery at that point. But then like even this last December when I realized the fawn response was a thing and I had some life circumstances come up that needed handling in 2020. And I think for all of us, 2020 was a doozy. And for me, that was a lot of personal stuff and I made some really good decisions, but that definitely went against that, the fawn response codependency wiring that I had. And I did that and I didn't realize how much my brain didn't even know what to do with my life once I wasn't being codependent anymore. It was just like, oh my God, what do we do now? Oh my God, what's going to happen now? And I was just like, calm down, brain, because I didn't realize it was a fawn response. I had no idea. So that kind of went on for like 3 months. And then I had like a reactivation last December. It's funny because again, I'm fully recovered, but it doesn't mean your limbic system can't activate if there's a reason to. So I've kind of been rewiring these last 4 months through that, but it's been very different because this time I have a whole fully recovered self in here and then like the limbic system. So it's like the proportion's very different. Before it was like I was just trying to find myself amongst the limbic, kind of chaos. And now it's like, well, I'm there, but there's still, stuff rewiring on the side. So that's been very different. And it's been very, very freeing to work through that layer. So that's what I mean by, I've had a lot of, I've had relapse or re-injury, relapse and reactivation happen through my journey. And a lot of it was most of it was because I didn't know the fawn response was a trauma response. That's really the main reason. And that's why I want to like make that upfront for people to lump that one in there and work on it along with the others. Again, just one of those things where it's like, well, if I've suffered through this, maybe someone else could not go through that because I give them the information sooner in their journey. So yeah, that's been my very windy journey up to this point.
Wow. Yeah. So you're not like some of the other stories where it's like, I've done every single round, followed all my pillars for the 3 years straight through. Like you've had some twists and turns. I've
had some serious twists and turns. And that was part of where I've had to really adjust. Like it took me about 2 years to get rounds to feel truly comfortable to my brain again after that re-injury experience, and that's something that like not a lot of people go through, but that's one of the things I offer when people work with me is this understanding that if your brain starts reacting to rounds, I can still help you through that. It's like not all is lost. Tools are tools, and if one becomes unavailable, you can still move forward in your recovery. It's not the end of the world. And having a more of a common sense, balanced ability to understand brain function and just come at it from any angle you can come at it from and have the goal be, if you're doing DNRS, if that's what you're doing, to get back to those 5 pillars, but and like to get back to rounds and so forth, but realizing that again, you got to work with where you're at and that anyone can heal if you're working with where you're at and you're giving yourself what you need in the present moment, you're moving toward recovery. And it doesn't really matter what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's your story is crazy. It's so interesting. Like, basically, one of your lessons to learn was that you just didn't need to jump into doing too much too fast. You were like reverting multiple times back to the minute you started to feel any relief, it sounds like you kind of just went right back into your old ways of doing things.
Yep.
Yeah. And your brain, I mean, what's that one book, when the body says no, it's like, hey, no, you're supposed to be actually like fully healing, which means, I think we said it earlier, which is like, you're literally like, basically, you're actually teaching yourself like a new way to be in the world, in a sense.
Exactly.
It's not just, hey, I get to like heal my limbic system and then go back to doing things all the way I used to do them. Like, no, that's what got me sick. I have to start doing things differently now. And
yeah, and it's like you're relating to every aspect of life from a whole different place. And that was the thing too, I think, because for all, everyone has their thing, whatever it was, when they have a perfect storm, and everyone's got their own thing, and the analogy I usually use is it's like you broke your ankle, and there's as many ways to break your ankle as there are people who've broken their ankle. We all have a slightly unique circumstance or a perfect storm, but usually the limbic system, it takes a while to uncrosswire whatever the circumstance was, because the brain likes to think that it had something to do with the injury. It's like, oh, well, if I got hit by a bike when I broke my ankle, then bikes are dangerous. And it's like, no, that's not how this works. But with the limbic system, it takes a while to be like, okay, well, just because it was a mold exposure or whatever, chemical exposure, doesn't mean that mold or chemicals are that scary. For me, it was my family, though. It was my relationship to my body, as it was, and to my kids and to family, into my children and my husband, and which is kind of a weird, unique, weird thing to have crosswired. But it was really, I realized that I had to build a sense of self for the first time ever, and then start to relate to my family members from this grounded sense of self, where I was no longer sacrificing myself for the family, because that's just kind of how I was taught. And that's a very common thing. It's looked upon as the loving thing to do as a mother in American culture and in a lot of other cultures, that you sacrifice your life for your children. It's just not sustainable at all. It doesn't actually work in the long run of life, because once you've sacrificed yourself, you can't give anymore once you're spent. So it's been very, so I had to kind of create a whole new platform of my sense of self, meeting my needs first, and relating to and caring for my family from a place of having my own self with boundaries, so that it's actually sustainable and healthy. And because I had so much fawn response and so many crossed wires with them, that was the part I had to take slowly. And that was actually the reason why I jumped back into it, because there was so much cross wiring there that I didn't even realize. It was so subconscious, this urge to just dive right back into things as soon as I was, like you said, as soon as I got any relief. It was like I put myself under the bus again. But it was, again, it's that cross wiring, and that's it. And that's the case for everyone. So I think it's just building a new place to relate to our lives from.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I want to also make note that, like, you mentioned how this is a really common theme in parenting or like in societal culture, like especially in our country and other countries. And the thing is too, what happens, it not only burns you out as a person, but you pass those behaviors on to the children, and then they only learn the same thing, and then they do the same thing to themselves and end up in the same position. Like, so somebody has to break that pattern, so that trauma is not passed on through the next generation. Because if you can show up as a mother and still honor your truth and take care of yourself and meet your needs, you're giving your kids like the most beautiful gift in the world. You're teaching them to also honor themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where it definitely, and that's something that is a theme in this work, that we're pattern breakers. Because when you have something like this, like a lot of times those patterns, if they're not causing massive issues in your life, you can bypass them. And there are many, many belief systems that support that. My religion supported that. Our culture supports that, bypassing these things and just continue to push on for the sake of people, going to school and having their sports practices and having everything look normal and look acceptable to society. Unless it becomes such a big problem that you have to do something about it, then people don't do something about it. So a lot of times it's like you're kind of, that's what goes back to that hero's journey. It's like, you're the chosen one to break the pattern. And I don't know, it's kind of fun because there's a truth to that. It's a bit melodramatic, but it's also kind of true. So yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to ask another question about your kind of Twisty-Turny journey, because this is so intriguing to me. So you do way too much too soon that first time. And then you literally had like the most crazy response where your brain went into like even new triggers. And now you said rounds were becoming triggering. So in that situation, in case anyone out there is listening and they have had this experience, whether it's to rounds or whatever healing modality they've gotten accustomed to using and they find it to become triggering, what did you do? Did you keep doing the rounds, or did you use and pull in and incorporate some other tools and like you said earlier, meet yourself where you're at? Like, how did you approach that?
Well, I approached it one way because at the time there was no support. And I think because that the DNRS overall, like when I interacted with them on the forum and over the phone, I don't think they wanted that idea getting out there because they didn't want people to be scared by it. So there was kind of I was shut down when I asked questions about it on the forum because I didn't want people seeing that. And it was like, okay, well, that's not very helpful. So just kind of tried to figure it out myself. So what I did and what I recommend that people do are not exactly the same because I pushed myself into it. What I did was eventually I kept just trying to do it for a while, and because I didn't know what else to do. And at that point I didn't have a lot of brain function. So I didn't have a big, wide understanding of recovery like I do now, 3 years later. So I just kept going at it and trying to do rounds. I took like a 2-day break at one point because I realized I needed to give myself a break from it. And the biggest thing I did as I actually rewired through rounds was staying in the present moment, forcing myself to stay so in the present moment and so connected to that just baseline of calm that we all have this like infinite ocean of calm within us, and just tapping into that and attuning yourself, attuning your limbic system to that only instead of to time or circumstance was really necessary because I needed to basically trick my limbic system into doing rounds without it knowing I was doing rounds. And that was what I spent a lot of time doing was doing that. And I was able to start using them again. It was just, I had to be very, very present and very intentional to make sure I gave myself a positive experience. And I incrementally trained. Like the first time I did a round after that first 2 days, I basically I sat in my practice space. I called a positive image to mind. Once I had like a little blip of a positive emotion, I was like, okay, yay, we're done. I didn't want to like push it. At that point, I was like, okay, we're just going to take this real slow and make sure the whole experience is positive so that I had a positive positive association with the tool. And so I worked on that for a long time. But as you can imagine, like I didn't use that. I wasn't able to use rounds as like my post incremental training tool because they were more triggering than incremental training was. So I found that music for me, because of the particular expression, it was very mental. I essentially had a mental illness after that. And so music was really helpful though, because I could really just pull the music right straight through my brain and have that be the only thing that was going through my head at the time. And then I had dose chemistry running through my body, and there was no ability for the limbic system. There was no chatter. There was nothing happening in there. So I used music as my mood elevator. And that was something I used 24/7 for a few years. And then I used it during my rounds, and I just, slowly using whatever would work to bring me into dose, into a calm state. I slowly pieced rounds back together over the course of a couple years. And that's what I did. Again, I don't really necessarily recommend that. When I work with people who have this happening, I recommend that they just stop doing rounds. If it's not benefiting them at all and it's just triggering, I recommend that they stop doing that. And just focus on whatever it is that you need to bring yourself to calm. Because ultimately, if there's been too much, a lot of times what happens is the rounds end up feeling too stimulating to the brain. That's really a common basic reaction is, okay, this is just too much stimulation, and it requires a very specific kind of focus. And when the brain is really exhausted, that even just trying to focus in that way to generate an image is too much, and it's in the brain, it gets triggered by trying to focus in that way. So a lot of times I just tell people, do whatever works. Like if watching kids movies, laying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, whatever it is that you need to just put your system into parasympathetic rest and digest, just get yourself into parasympathetic and stay there no matter what it takes. And then things start to thaw. Because that's one of the things, a lot of times the reason this happens is that we do push ourselves using our tools, and it's just too much stimulation for the limbic system and the nervous system. When we're pushing ourselves to do a lot of rounds and to do a lot of mood elevation and to do a lot of incremental training, and the system can't support that, we end up getting the system gets really overstimulated. And people are like, really, I just need to lay here and do nothing for a few weeks? And I'm like, yeah, just do yourself a favor. Really just do whatever it takes to stay calm. Your system just needs a break from all that overstimulation and the effort. It just needs to be able to reset. So giving yourself a reset, whatever that looks like, and then slowly going back into rounds as they become available, and as that kind of focus becomes available again. And there are so many different things out there. There's so many different meditations, breathing exercises, somatics, movement, music, polyvagal type, releases and vagal stimulation. And there's so many different tools you can use to help put yourself in a parasympathetic state. And then again, slowly, and that's one of the biggest things, even people who haven't had this experience, that I encourage people to do, is use your tools, all of them, in a way that feels good to you, so that you maintain a positive association with your tools. Because again, it's about the process more than anything. And if you use your tools to push yourself too hard in a way that's not actually feeling good to you, your limbic system is going to start to feel like that tool is the bad guy. And then that's when it becomes tricky. And so as much as you can, just do things in a way that feels good to your nervous system and feels soothing and comfortable. And again, learning how to push yourself and what that looks like and what that means in a way that actually works with your system and where it's at, so that the tools continue to feel safe and you don't have to rewire your tools. Because it's possible to do, and I've walked people through doing that, but it's just one of those things that, again, if you can avoid it, it's much better to avoid having to do that.
Absolutely. Wow, this is such good stuff. And I know, I'm even loving hearing all this, because, maybe you had this experience, but sometimes you're on this journey. And even though now we have so many people to connect with, which is great, right? There's all these networks and WhatsApp groups and there's the forums, but sometimes you can still almost feel like a little alone in it. Wait, is this just happening to me? Am I the only one going through this? What's wrong with me? Is that, that what's wrong with me question?
Yes.
And this is a good reminder that we're not alone and there's nothing wrong with us, and that all of this it's all just kind of normal, and it can happen. And it's not because you're wrong or doing something bad.
I'm so glad you point that out. And that's one of the things I tell people. I always feel like, again, because of my background, I feel like some sort of version of a priest in a confessional, where it's you hear people's, because I'm a coach and a recovery coach, you hear people's journeys, and they, because of the nature of it, people have to tell you kind of the deepest, darkest things and whatever it is that's not working, or how they really feel about things. And it's been so interesting, because I've had this theory for a long time that all human beings are human, right? And that sounds like a silly thing to say, but basically that we all have that we're all the same underneath the surface. We all have similar fears and desires and so forth, regardless of our difference. And there's so many surface level differences, but I've always had this theory that all humans are human. And it's been a great testimony to the truth of that, getting to hear so many different people talk about what they struggle with. And it's one of those things with, again, a lot of times the limbic system recovery community, there is, and necessarily so, especially for those at the beginning of the journey, there's a hyper focus on positivity. And I think that's really important, especially for that first 6 months to a year. And whenever your limbic system is really activated, to keep things very light and fluffy. But I think it's important. And one of the things that I want to do more of, and I try to do this somewhat with my YouTube channel, is to provide kind of a space for those people who are past that very early part of recovery, and to be yeah, this is what it's like to go through recovery. And we all have the same struggles. You're not, just because it's this intense, or you're having this happen, you're having this happen. Again, there's nothing wrong with you. That's normal. Because that's one of people's most frequent questions is this really normal for it to be this intense, or for this weird thing to be happening, or that weird? Are you sure this is normal? And I'm always just kind of saying yeah, totally normal. It's one of those things where when you've gone, I know for me, going through this experience, it's the kind of stuff people wouldn't believe. You go through things that most people, if they've not had the experience, they wouldn't believe it. And so when I've stopped trying to get empathy from people who haven't gone through recovery, because it's one of those things where it's I wouldn't have believed this stuff is real unless I'd gone through it. But being able to extend that to other people and say, yeah, it's really normal for it to be this weird or this intense or whatever. That's totally normal. Everyone has that experience. And the reason that people don't talk about it is because that's part of the code in limbic retraining, is that we don't talk about our struggles. But I think, again, trying to find a safe place where people can hear that, yeah, everyone's about the same struggles is really comforting, because that's a normal part of the journey, and you're not doing anything wrong, and you're still healing, and everything's okay. It's just part of the path.
Yeah. And I think that's so important. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it is part of the journey, in the brain rewiring, to not bring the struggles and the difficulties up. But sometimes we just do need a little assurance. Sometimes we need that safe space to just not to dwell on it, but to just know that we're not alone, and that it's not because we're doing it wrong or not good enough. Because what I know, I can only imagine happened to, multiple people, and a little bit for myself, is when you do have those moments, and then you go into, oh my gosh, I'm doing it wrong, or you go into, I'm not doing it good enough. And then you almost can become even more hyper focused and try even harder and actually even like overstimulate in a sense more, rather than realizing like, no, it's just part of the process. You're okay. You're great. Like you're doing good.
Exactly. And I had a mentor and a dear friend who's I'm still dear friends with. And she told me at one point that when I was saying like, I feel like I'm failing at loving myself because I wasn't able to actually keep myself fully out of a rut at that point in time. And she's like, no, Christina, like you are whole and complete behind the limbic chatter. Like you're already whole. And if you're doing your best to love yourself, it's enough. And it was just exactly what I needed to hear. And that's one thing I tell my clients, people I work with. It's like, if you do everything you can and you can't keep yourself out of a rut, it's okay. If your limbic system's going in circles for a little while and you've got its, and even if you're panicking and you're losing it, it's okay. That's part of, sometimes we literally just cannot reach for that dose chemistry. The brain just can't get there right now for what, there's so many different reasons why that can be the case. And just accepting as much as you can, accepting it as uncomfortable as it is, and knowing that eventually you'll hit a point where you're like, okay, I've got to get out of this. And realizing too, for me, that like those points in recovery where it feels like you're doing it wrong and it feels like, well, I can't get out of this rut. And, or you feel like you're failing because you're giving into it or something. A lot of times that's part of the journey, because the discomfort of it is part of what teaches us things. Because one of the things I started to tell myself at one point is, I'm going to be the way out of this. Like, I don't care if there isn't a way out. I'm going to become the way out, because I'm not staying here. I'm not putting up with this anymore. Like, I don't care what it takes to get out of here. I'm getting out of here. The end. I will turn into a freaking unicorn if I have to get out of here. And it's like, that's part of the point, because once you decide that you're going to create a path out for yourself, nothing can stop you. And so sometimes experiencing that discomfort, just what it kind of does is it sparks the coals of all of your untapped potential and strength that you didn't even know you had until you were so uncomfortable that you were determined to find it. Like, that's part of the journey, and that's a very normal part of the journey, and it's a very necessary part of the journey for most of us, I think. Like, that's part of what leads people to recover in the first place, is the fact that they're so uncomfortable in their lives that they can't stand it anymore. You know, that place of being between that rock and a hard place where you just can't stand it and you can't take it anymore, that's a very, very powerful, important thing. Because as human beings, that our nature, we're not going to change something until we really can't stand it anymore. So that's actually a good thing. You know, as uncomfortable it is, it's a good thing that happens, and it's part of healing.
Yeah. And it's good and refreshing to talk about all of this. And like you said, there's times where you'll even tell people, don't do your rounds, like do whatever it takes to be calm. And I know that that's another thing that can become a pop along this journey, is the fear that if you don't do them and don't do them perfectly, then I won't heal. That limiting belief, you know, that comes in the act of the attempt to heal. Like, oh, but if I don't do this, or if I miss this, I won't heal, you know, and you have to trust that that's just simply not true.
Exactly. I mean, and that's part of what I love, is the understanding that the human body, the human self it's self-healing in every way. And that's, again, I can't emphasize enough how like the brain is no different than any other thing. It's inside your body, just like everything else. It's designed to heal spontaneously. And I think as humans, we have, and it's so the case in like every culture we get so I don't even know why we do it. It's such a funny thing we do as humans, where we're like, this is the magic recipe. This is, if we do this, and this, in this order, then everything's going to be perfect. And we love doing this as humans. We just absolutely love it. And it's like, we have our little idea in our head of all the boxes to check where then everything is sparkling and magical and perfect. And I mean, this can go from like hosting a dinner party to recovery. Like, it doesn't matter, you know, it's just, that's how it is to be human. And I think one of, again, the most freeing and relieving and exhilarating parts of recovery was realizing, like, I don't know what the magic things are. I get to discover them. Like, I don't know exactly what I need to heal, but I know that I have an intuition and I have an inner knowing, and that when I move toward the right thing, my nervous system's going to calm down and my limbic system's going to calm down. And I'll be like, well, hey, that worked. That's the point, right? Is the more I spend time in this relaxed state, then the stress switch is going to start to turn off and I'm going to start to normalize. That's all I need to do. It's that simple. But then it's that simple in practice, but obviously then you can end up needing to do a lot of different things and you don't know exactly what you need to do beforehand. And that's the part where it's like, oh no, I look like I don't know what I'm doing, and I look like I'm being irresponsible, and I look like I'm being flaky. And that's where, again, and owning your journey and being like, okay, but I'm the only person inside of this brain. I'm the only person inside of this body. And I know this is working, even if it looks like, you know, someone playing, I don't know, checkers in the ocean to somebody else. Like, I know it's working. So that's, it's a relief to realize that we don't know what the magic combination is, but we get to discover it.
Yes. I love that. And I'm all about, like, I just love, I think my whole life, I've always been just so passionate about experimenting and just playing and practicing and discovering things, like trying things on and deciding what feels good and right for me in that moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
But something you said that really even stood out and like was really helpful for me, even where I'm at right now, was, I know that there's some days still that I literally just cannot do a round. Like I literally have no physical capacity to like, even the thought of doing the visualization, it's like too much brain power.
Yep.
And in those moments, all I want to do is just lie there and do like a meditation, just like literally just breathe,
Yeah.
and or be guided by somebody on a really simple mindfulness meditation, something that takes such little brain power. And I realize that it's kind of more present when I am kind of, maybe I'm starting to do more, incorporate more, saying yes more. And there's a little bit of extra stimulation in my life. And my brain's just like, yep, we're done. We're tapped out. And so it's interesting because that's a perfect example of a time when I thought, what's wrong with me that even the thought of a visualization sounds like too much, but it's like nothing.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because I think of people are like, well, when our limbic systems are activated, we have a lot of like qualifying questions. Well, what about this? What if this happens? Can I recover if this? Can I recover if that? And I always just end up saying recovery is a choice. If you choose to recover, you will. All of those questions don't apply. But one of the things I say in the context of that is that rounds are like, and this is very, very, I really believe this is true. Rounds are like brain exercise. And that practice of visualization is brain exercise. And it's so crucial. It's really important if we need to exercise those pathways. And as you're describing so beautifully, and that's the beautiful process of recovery, is as we recover, we're doing more and we're exercising our brain by actually living our lives more. And then what you need is rest and not exercise after that to get back to that place of equilibrium. Whereas before you needed to exercise your brain to get out of a rut. Now, a lot of times it's just like, well, sometimes you need that. And sometimes your brain already got its exercise and it just needs that swing in a hammock to kind of relax and come back to parasympathetic. And so that was when I started transitioning, I realized, meditation is like a very deep rest for the brain, and doing visualization or rounds is like brain exercise. And so it's not like one's better than the other, it's just like the difference between rest and exercise. They're both very, very important if we want to have a healthy body. Or I think of as nutrients. It's like, well, you're talking about the difference between protein and carbohydrates or fat. Like they're all necessary. It's just a matter of knowing when, being attuned to your body and saying, well, what do I need in this moment? Do I need to sit here and eat a bowl of spaghetti, or do I want to sit here and eat 2 avocados? Like, what is it that my brain actually needs right now? And knowing that if you're giving it what it needs, you're moving in the right direction.
Yes, that's a really good point. I like how you kind of break that down. And it's actually leading me to what I was actually going to ask you next, which was, I know that we've talked about ultimately we all have this own inner authority and this intuition, but again, sometimes through limbic impairment and being dysregulated in our nervous system, we can almost lose that connection to that inner knowing. So for you, and then maybe you could give examples for anyone out there listening to kind of spark that feeling inside of them. What 2-part question. 1, when did you really feel and how? Like, what was the signs in your like in your mind, in your spirit, in your intuition that led you to know that you were ready to transition out of your regular commitment to DNRS into some of these other modalities and into recovery?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer that one first, and then whatever the next one is, we'll do that. So part of it was, I started changing my structure. I did it very slowly because I knew, and it kind of goes back to what they were talking about. We have the part of our brain, part of our mind, or the structure of the human person is a superego, which is responsible. Superego is the part that really likes there to be someone else to tell us what to do. There is this whatever implements, and within us, within the individual, this is right and wrong. So your superego is going to tell you this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing, and make you feel really bad if you don't do what it is telling you is the right thing to do. And for a lot of us, because we've had that tendency to give our power away to anything, any particular authority figure for our entire lives, a lot of times what happens in recovery is you give your authority away to the program you're using. And so the program becomes your dictator. And so I recognized that I was going to need to very slowly for myself, like, ease out of doing rounds the typical way, because my limbic system was afraid to move away from the DNRS structure. But I was like, this is my recovery, and me trusting myself to know what's right for myself. I know that that's the foundation for my recovery and in the long haul. And I'm realizing that, like, it's time to start transitioning. So I started just doing rounds differently at first. And I started doing more, I stopped doing the stop, stop, stop. I would lay down for rounds. I would sit, I would just do whatever. A lot of times I would start, set an intention for my round, and then just start visualizing and see what happened. And I would do 20 minutes of visualization, but it was like, unicorns and magical forests with cottages and, all kinds of really wonderful, fantastical stuff that I absolutely loved, and my brain ate it up. And my rounds actually became really, really good again at that point, because I was really letting kind of my imagination lead the way, and it became very enjoyable again. So that was the first thing I did, was just allow myself to break away from the structure a little bit. I still did an hour. I still did 3 20-minute rounds a day, but the round was just me setting an intention and going into 20 minutes of fantasy visualization. And it was all very meaningful and metaphorical and so forth. So definitely served a purpose. And it helped. Like, it definitely regulated me. I felt much, much, much calmer and more centered afterwards. So I was like, okay, this is working. And then over time, it was like I started loosely moving that to meditation sometimes, like in the fall. And, so that was like around May of 2019, I started doing that. And then probably around November, December, maybe October, November, December. So about 6 months later, I started doing, like, for 20, sometimes I was like, even that felt like too much stimulation. So I would turn on really meditative music and just let my body move to the music for 20 minutes. And it was like, that was the thing that would ground me. So I was just kind of following like what worked in any given moment. And so meditative movement, and then sometimes just plain meditation, or I would sit there and be like, my limbic system wants me to tell it a story. So I would just talk for 20 minutes and tell myself a story. So I started kind of branching farther and farther away from the structure, while still doing an hour of some sort of meditative, creative practice every day. And eventually, till in December, I was just doing an hour of deep meditation using meditative music. And I was accessing like, what's the brain state where you have like lucid dreaming states and that sort of thing. And that was actually the really deep meditative state. I could tell that like that was actually far more healing than doing rounds had been at the time. Like, the rounds were what I had needed in the past, but there was something about the way that all the pieces came together. And there was this profoundly deep rest in that state, where I felt like it was like sleep on steroids. Like, it wasn't even like sleep. It was like its own thing that was even more restorative than sleep. And I was like, wow, okay, this apparently is another part of recovery. So I just started allowing my practice itself to evolve, and keeping up that, minimum of an hour a day of meditative practice. And then eventually that kind of, very slowly over the course of about the next 6 months, transitioned from an hour of structured meditation a day, where I would plop myself down for 20 minutes at a time, like I did with rounds, into more of like an as needed type of thing. And where it fit more into my life, until eventually, like, in the last few months, or I don't know, probably the last 6 months or so, doing structured meditation would be regression at this point. For me, it's been more about creating a way of life where I'm being the person I was in rounds, and I'm being the person I was in meditation while I live my life. And I'm being in that present state where like life is like a round now. But it takes obviously certain amount of effort and awareness and curious observer and intention to create that kind of brain state in your life. But at this point, it's more like making that the pattern while I live. So it's been a very slow and incremental change, because I think that's important. It's for us to change things incrementally and not just stop on the dime. For most of us, I think the brain does respond well to incremental change. So that was my particular journey with that. And really what it comes down to, and as I got, as the body became not a triggering place anymore, because being for most of us, when we start thinking about your body as a trigger, it's just triggering. So once that, and it's been a while, but that was another part of the practice for me in post-recovery or later stages of recovery, was getting into my body in a healthy way and creating a positive association with my senses and with movement and feeling good in my body, and learning how to listen to my body again, because I could actually hear my body's messages and not my limbic system's messages. And reestablishing that connection was a big part of that later part of recovery too, so that I knew, like, when I was eating and moving and so forth, that I was doing it because that was what my body wanted and what I needed, and not because my limbic system was telling me, you need to diet, you need to exercise, or you feel like eating all this chocolate because you're emotional. And it was like, no, I want to make sure that I'm actually tuning into what my body needs. So that's been a big part of my practice as well. It's just been staying very tuned in and really connecting powerfully with the intuition of my body again, so that I can accurately read my body for the rest of my life and give it what it needs.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really awesome. So you really you kind of just incrementally broke away from one way of doing things and kind of slowly integrated different modalities or different tools based on what felt good to you or what you needed, and then broke away from the the 1 hour strictness of it into something more as an on basis, like what you felt you needed in each moment.
Exactly. And sometime post recovery, that looked like meditating for 4 hours a day. I mean, it just depended on where I was at. Like when COVID started, like I realized I needed to nip the generalized subconscious panic of the culture in the bud, because it was kind of affecting me like it was affecting everyone. And I was like, I'm not buying into this. But for that first few weeks of the pandemic, I meditated probably for 2 to 4 hours a day, because I was like, I got to get my brain unplugged from the mass panic in our world right now. And so that was what it needed. So it wasn't as necessarily always less either. Sometimes it was more than, it had been during recovery even, but it was just kind of in response to the circumstances. And it was more like, okay, well, what do I need to keep my level? And this is something too, for anyone out there who's recovering, realize that when it comes to how you use your tools and how often and how much you use your tools and what tools you use, you get to determine your bar for your quality of life. And that's part of like why my practice has been still very disciplined, because I know that I determine my quality of life by how high I set my standards for myself, and so and that was where COVID was great for me, because when that happened, it was like, okay, I already did this whole panic thing. I'm done with this. This was like right after I achieved like my last layer of recovery. And I was like, okay, no, I'm not engaging with this. I am determined to be calm and grounded and happy and living my life no matter what is happening in this world. I don't care. And I made that choice for myself. And then it took me a few weeks of meditating for 2 to 4 hours a day to really get that in. But then I haven't had an issue with it since. And I've watched a lot of other people struggle with that ongoingly since COVID started, of all this fear and all this confusion around what they're going to do about it. So I'm glad I put that work in at the upfront. But I think that's a lot of times people are like, well, should I do this? Should I do more? And it's like, well, you get to decide that. You get to decide, what works for you, and you get to decide the bar you set for yourself in terms of your quality of life and how you want to live your life.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Yes, that's so well said. And when you were talking about the meditation experience you were having, a few minutes back, you were saying you were in this like crazy meditation experience.
Yeah.
What were you doing?
What was I doing? Okay, so I used, and I know there's a whole program called Safe and Sound that's structured around binaural beats, but one of the things when I needed to wire and calm to my brain, because that was a big part of my journey, I think at some point, I can't even remember what point that was at now, but wiring and calm, realizing I've never been calm in my life and I need to teach my brain how to be calm. I stumbled across, because I've got a Spotify account pretty early on in my journey, because it's a really cheap way to have access to like an insane amount of resources that are really helpful for recovery. I created a beat-based playlist. It's not like structured binaural beats, but it's very similar. And a lot of nature sounds and a lot of the sounds. And I realized post fact, it was like people who make music out of ordinary life sounds, like the sound of something like a door scratching across as it closes, or a squeak, or water running like a creek, or the sound of wind, or the sound of a person breathing or yawning, mixed with these really rich, deep beats. And that was really, really, really powerful for my brain. So what I would do is because of my journey, I learned after my re-injury to just hook my brain into the music, so that I was just following with all of my attention every kind of like almost seeing the music as its own terrain, following along to every dip and every bump and every beat and every sound with my brain, and really getting there's almost like a mixing of boundaries, where it was like I felt I could just feel the experience of it very much viscerally in my nervous system, because I was so focused on it. And really what I realized in retrospect is those are just all the things you should experience as an infant, basically. Like beats being, the heartbeat, water, ordinary life sounds, feeling very secure and very, very safe. And it's incredibly healing and powerful. So I would stay in that state. And I now have a playlist I still listen to sometimes to meditate and just relax, because it's very relaxing. It's like 10 hours long at this point, because I've just kept adding songs to it over time. But that's what I used when I meditated that. And then I created another playlist that was a bit more high. It was more like meditative, ecstatic dance type music with more like something you'd hear at an ecstatic dance or some other kind of, hippie kind of thing. I don't know, more along those lines. And it's much bigger feeling, much more expansive, which is calming at times. But the other one is really, that was really what I used. And that's how I found those brain states, is I would just be focused so much on that space. But really what it does is it plugs you into, like I said earlier, we all have this infinite ocean of calm inside of us and our own interior landscape. And the music just helped me connect to that within myself. And the sustained focus over time gives you an incredible control of your brain so that you can anchor yourself in an in-between brain state where you're not asleep. You're so deeply relaxed that you're not asleep, but you're also not really awake. And there were times where I would start having dreams playing, but because I was meditating and I wasn't actually asleep, I could control how the dreams went that I was having. Like the things that were happening in my mind were happening spontaneously, but if I wanted to change them, I could. And that was a cool experience. So there was just a lot of, when you really use that sustained focus and tap into the mastery you can have of your own brain, anything is possible.
That is so cool. That sounds amazing.
It was amazing.
I want to take myself there. I don't know much about Spotify. I have I think a free version downloaded, and I haven't figured out how to use it yet. But isn't it, I'm pretty sure, can't people share playlists?
Yes. And I have all my playlists. My profile is public. So anyone who's listening to this, I don't know if there's a way to put a link to it, but and I'm happy to share. I have a number of playlists I've used, and I've used all of them kind of in a medicinal or healing way. I mean, some of them are like my personal favorites, like my favorite U2 songs and stuff like that, but most of them are like various, like I have a high vibe beats, and my beats is the one that the beat based on a meditative playlist, and more like sing along time and just all different kinds of stuff. And I've used to heal and to just, most of it's uplifting, inspirational, and a lot of it's instrumental, because that way, and that's one of the tools I help people use in creating new material for rounds or accessing, trying to help open up the brain to remember more of your life and create a life. As I feel like when you listen to music, a lot of times it because of the way it uses your whole brain, and it can tap pretty deeply into the brain, and it's very emotionally evocative, and it can evoke really powerful images. And they're very fuzzy images, though. They're almost like energetic images of like an experience. Like you hear a song and it feels like this very high, like maybe this one feels like romance in Prague, and this one feels like laying by a creek by yourself in the summer when you're 8, and this one feels like, and it's something you can create visualizations out of. And also just when you put your headphones on and you have that playing as you live your life, it can help you. Because of the way it's changing your brain while you're listening to it, you start to notice and see different things in your environment and have a different perspective of your life almost automatically, because your brain's in an altered state. And then you can perpetuate that and make that your life experience. And that's largely what I've done. The classical music is great for that too, but it's a really, when we're just seeing recovery as a creative state where you get to create your life experience, and it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I had somebody on here who's actually, I haven't published it yet, but I interviewed this really awesome guy. His name is Murray Hittery, and he's a composer. He composes music with like mostly piano, but binaural beats and some other kinds of beats and stuff like that. So it was really interesting because it was just so cool to hear all like the really scientific explanations of what music is actually doing in our bodies and our brains.
That does sound completely fascinating. How cool.
Yeah. So that'll be a fun one to share. And when you use music in your rounds, do you mostly have it playing as like background, or do you actually incorporate it into the experience that you're visualizing? I've
done both. It depends on the kind, because of what I just described of like, a lot of times I would find a song when I started doing intuition or like imaginative, creative type of rounds instead of more structured rounds. I would go through that particular playlist and I would pick a song that felt good to my nervous system in that moment, where it was like, okay, that feels really good. That's perfect. That's what I'm craving right now, is this feeling. And then I would create a visualization out of that feeling. And I would put that same song on loop for whatever, 20 minutes, or pick one song or another one that sounded similar and put them on loop, and then just create a storyline to match the feeling that was there in the song. And that to me too was more restful. Like you were saying, it can really feel exhausting to have to generate so much energy by yourself. So having, like when you were saying, I just want to have someone else guide me through. For me, that with the music was kind of like a guide where it helped to generate the feeling, and I could kind of co-create with the music instead of having to generate all the feeling by myself, because I could sometimes feel overstimulating to my brain. So that's how I used it sometimes. But then when I was retraining on rounds, I could visualize for, like 3 minutes at a time. But like when I was starting to retrain on rounds, but I couldn't get like even a full 5 to 7 minutes for like a past memory. So I would use visualize, like being at a concert, like a Jason Mraz concert, because I'm in love with Jason Mraz. And then I would like listen, I would, do the visualization, then I would go straight into like a 3-minute song. And still, as much as I could, try to pretend like I was at the concert while I was listening to the song, and I would count that as memory. Even though I only visualized technically by myself for 3 minutes of it, that's all I could do. So I used it kind of like as an extender to get the full like 6 minutes or whatever that I wanted. And I would do that for both rounds. So I kind of use it as a filler, but it worked because it extended the feeling and I could keep myself in that heightened emotional state for the full 15 minutes if I used them as a extender or a filler.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're so creative with your approach to all of it.
Yeah. Well, I had to be. Again, that's one of those things where, like I said, I was like determined to become the way to recover because I wasn't going to stay where I was and I didn't care what it took. So I just, did whatever worked, and I've done, and that's part of what I love about being a recovery coach and not being attached to any particular program or set of tools is that, there really are as many ways to recover as there are people. We're all going to have to use our own unique spin on things, and having had such a variety of experiences and being open to that, I think it can. And it can be helpful for people, I think, to realize that it's okay to be creative and that there really are an infinite number of ways to do this. There's no, like, if what you're trying isn't working, that's okay, because there's literally an infinite number of other things you can try.
Yes.
And something's going to work.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And we can get really stuck on sometimes, like, especially after, you've already done the route of Western medicine and maybe, alternative medicine, and you've tried all these things that didn't work. It can be sometimes really hard it's like you almost just want to rely that one thing is going to be like the end all be all solution. And it can be very intimidating to try to veer off and trust that intuition because you're so afraid if you don't do something right or perfectly, or you're like, oh, that person did it this way and they got better. And it's like, yeah, but we're so unique, We
are so unique. And that's definitely one thing, again, like working with people who've also had LSI since birth and realizing like, I never cease to be amazed. I really want to research this more in my lifetime in any way I can. As much as the human brain, there's so much that is the structure's the same. And that's so cool. That's why a lot of times the same things work for such large numbers of people. Each person's life experience creates a unique brain structure, and the kind of like, we could all have LSI, but like what that looks like in terms of which core beliefs have been running your brain your whole life that aren't healthy can create an entirely different, like I almost imagine like a shape, or I think of the person's brain as like a tangle of strings, like the neurology of it. And it's like, it can be a completely different shape, different color, different style. And it really, it's so fascinating and cool to me how we all have such a unique structure. But yeah, to speak to what you said about that, I feel like a lot of us, again, I think partly because of the nature of limbic system impairment and the way we feel victimized and disempowered by it, we want a savior. We want there to be one thing that saves the day. That's not us. We don't want to have to be that person because that sounds like a lot of work. And then it's not as predictable, right? The limbic system wants that predictability of knowing, okay, well, it's this thing. Again, if I just check these boxes in this order, boom, everything's perfect. And realizing that, like, being willing to believe in ourselves is like a first time in a lifetime thing, I think, for a lot of us in this process, or either that or it's something we haven't done in a while. And it's a big thing to believe in yourself, that you know what to do to heal yourself. That's a little different than being like, I can ride a two-wheeler. Like it's a bigger deal than that. So, but that's really, I think, the key is like learning how to say, okay, I believe in myself. I believe in my infinite potential, and I'm going to work to bring that infinite potential to fruition, to like to do something with it, build something with it, and that's the key, is continuing to believe in yourself more than the limbic doubts or the limbic fears or the fact that most people in society don't do stuff like this, those sorts of things. I think that's the biggest challenge, is to believe in yourself.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely, but it's such a beautiful, 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 beautiful thing if we can do it,
Oh, absolutely.
Because we do have infinite potential, and we are all our own healers, and we are all powerful beings.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, speaking of all of this, what is you? I know we have a lot of different things we've talked about, so I'm very clear that you're probably really passionate about a lot of this stuff. But like, what is there like one message that you would say you're most passionate about sharing with the world?
That recovery is possible. That's the first thing that pops into my head because, like you said, people try so many things, and I have the privilege of being friends with some people who've had some of the most impossible situations, and I've seen their determination to recover pull through for them and their healing. And I've had that for myself, where I really believed that recovery is a choice. It really is just a choice, and that if you decide to recover, the universe is going to deliver whatever it is you need. If you make that choice and you're committed, even if you give up from time to time and you have to get yourself back on the horse or whatever, like if you make a decision to recover, there is nothing in this world that can get in the way of your recovery.
That's awesome. And I love that, because that's another thing people can feel like if they took, a little break or missed a few days or didn't, show up for themselves one day in some way or not another, that's okay. We're still going to recover. Exactly.
And having that, again, that learning from those experiences, asking yourself, well, why was it that I did? Or maybe the lesson is just forgive yourself. And I think that's one of the most powerful things, because forgiveness detaches us from the things that otherwise we would kind of get Velcroed to, and that would keep us from moving forward, is being able to, whether it was something that happened in your life or something someone else did, or whether you slacked off or whatever, to be able to be like, okay, I forgive you. I forgive you, life, for letting this happen. I forgive this person for, being whatever you were that day and doing this thing, or I forgive myself for falling off the wagon. And that frees you back up to just realize that, the truth really is that every single moment is a fresh start if we let it be. But it takes an incredible amount of strength to be that childlike, and to kind of revive ourselves from that jaded bitterness that can happen when we've had to pick ourselves up so many times, to realize, but it's still true that every moment is a new fresh start. And that really is the truth. And it's, they say, every moment's the first day of the rest of your life, or the first moment of the rest of your life. And I live by that. I do, because otherwise it's like, what happens? I fall into this jaded, bitter pattern of being a victim to life. And it's like, no, I'm not going to play that game. I know what's possible. And I know that by picking myself up, I'm just becoming stronger and stronger. And whatever's presenting right now, that I'm becoming invincible, and that the stronger I get, the easier life's going to be, and I'll be able to just that much more easily accomplish everything else I want to accomplish in my life in the future, because I'm really used to picking myself up, So yeah, absolutely.
So good. What inspires you every day?
That's a really my experiences in recovery, my experience of God, honestly, and that's one thing. Like I started having mystic experiences when I was 5, and the absolute wonder of being alive. Just color, joy, light, music, sound, the fact that the fact that I have a choice, the fact that no matter what, I can still create something beautiful out of every moment. That's what inspires me most. Like last week, we didn't do this because I was sick, and it was like, for whatever reason, I don't know why, my brain was super activated. And so I had like limbic its and limbic stuff going on, and a flu at the same time. And it was like one of those things where my brain wouldn't relax enough to let me sleep. But then of course I was sick with the flu, and that was all I wanted to do was sleep. So it was just caught in this like hell between those two places for a few days. And it was like, even during that, I was like, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to keep my headphones on. I just listened to that playlist, and I was like, I'm just going to hang out in the ether. Like I'm going to get through this. Like, I don't care what it takes. I have a choice. And I don't have to surrender. Like, I know this is miserable, but I don't care, and just that ability to choose, that's honestly the most inspiring thing to me. And this idea that I think recovery for me has stripped me of a lot of the false values of wanting to impress people, or prove things to people, or save face or whatever. And I realized, like, I want to be able to be there for my kids, and I want to be able to leave a legacy. Like, I know that one day I won't be here anymore, and I want this world to be a different place than I found it. So, and I know that by being strong in every single moment, I'm building that legacy. It's invisible, but it's going to show eventually. It's like an iceberg. You build the foundation, and eventually you'll build something huge on top of it. And, because I've experienced having lived in this very limited, not human life type experience for most of my life, because I was limbic and I didn't even know what it was to feel alive. And then going into this place where even when I'm suffering, I still feel alive. And I'm like, I want as many people as possible who haven't had the experience of being alive to be able to have that before they die. So that's what inspires me every day, is the fact that I know I can build that, and I know I can do that. And that every moment is just a chance to build that legacy.
What a beautiful gift to be able to say that at one point I didn't even know what it felt like to feel alive, and now I can suffer and still feel alive.
Exactly.
Like,
And that's what inspires me. The fact that this is possible. And that's what my main message is: recovery is possible, because it's like, you have to believe it's possible to start going after it. And I've experienced so many things I couldn't even have imagined. I mean, even just like my relationship with food is one small thing. And I didn't know, like, I didn't even realize I couldn't digest carbohydrates for most of my life until like 6 months ago. And I was like, oh, this is why people like rice, like beans. Like, I never understood, because I couldn't digest carbohydrates, and I didn't even know it. I couldn't experience the pleasure of it because I had an eating disorder my entire life and I didn't even know it, So it was like, there's just been so many things that I realize after going through them are so basic. The feeling of agency, the feeling like, well, if something goes wrong, I can do something about it. Like, I didn't have that for most of my life either. So, there's just so many of these things where it's like they're such incredible experiences to have after having not had them. And I want to reach as many people as I can who are looking for that, and daring to believe the unbelievable. And I want to be able to say, yeah, you can have the unbelievable. You can go for it.
Yes, I love it. And so, speaking of that, you've already mentioned that you are a recovery coach, and you do actually coach now and help people. So how can people connect with you and find you?
So my YouTube channel is the best place, and I've left my email address on there a couple places. For a while, my schedule was full enough, and I actually didn't really want people finding me because I didn't want to have to turn people down. But at this point, I have room in my schedule, and I just kind of left that there. I did create a website at one point, and I paid for a full year of it, and then they were like, you didn't click on some link in an email we sent you, so we took your website down. And I was like, hey, I paid for that. You can't do that. But I was like, whatever. Most people find me through my YouTube channel. They message me on Facebook Messenger, and then we go from there, because I like it that way. I like people finding me and finding my work and resonating with it, because I really believe that connection is, having a connection with the person you're working with is important. And my specialty is people who have atypical journeys, because mine was so twisty-turny. So people where they've had relapses, or they've stopped and restarted, or their life circumstances are tricky, or the program, like whatever program they're using isn't working exactly as laid out, because that's been my experience. That's my specialty. So that's what I've done. We'll create a website at some point here. In a little while when I'm ready. But for now, my YouTube channel is the best place to find me.
Okay. Are you on social media at all, or not?
I am. Yes. I have a public Facebook page, and I have an Instagram page, and my Facebook page is kind of like just me, like my family life, my normal self. And my Instagram is where I just share like more my journey. I wanted a place where I could just kind of be like, this is my journey of life. And I share, photography and like dancing videos and stuff, because dance has been a huge part of my recovery. And I realized at the end of my recovery, I was like, well, there's all these things I want to do with my life. But if I ask the 5-year-old little girl in me, all I want to do is put on pretty clothes and dance on a stage. So that's one thing that I'm working on, is getting myself in that direction. But it's also just medicine for me. So I share kind of my writing, and I have a blog, and I write poetry and stuff like that, and I share my journey on there too. So I'm kind of all over the place.
Where's your blog?
It's called Eye of the Needle.video blog is the actual, like, if you type that in, you'll find it. It's just like a basic, I don't know, what is it, word? It's one of the most basic blog platforms. And I've written some stories about my recovery on there. And then a lot of poetry, because for me, poetry and dance have been the two things that have kind of helped me. They've helped me get through my roughest points. And I love being able to put that out there and share it with anyone who might. It's that same thing we talked about earlier of like, you're not alone. These human experiences we have are across the board. And I think that things like poetry and things like dance are just very basic human expressions that are easy to connect with, partly because they're mysterious and intangible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And would you want to share your Instagram for people? Anyone listening?
Absolutely. It's under my name. I'm like brand new to Instagram, and I'm not like super techie, but I don't know if we can include links, but I'd be super happy to share my Instagram with anyone. Cause it's just, that's just kind of like me sharing from my heart. This is my journey of life, and this is what's happening.
Yeah, I can include all kinds of links. So we'll make sure we have the Spotify links, your YouTube channel, Instagram, and definitely your blog.
Awesome.
Yes. Any final thoughts, or any just final words of wisdom, or anything you want to share today that you feel passionate or called to share with anyone listening that we haven't touched base on? Or that you want to just re-emphasize?
You're worth it. You're worth your recovery. I think that's something that, again, a lot of us who've had limbic activity or a slight impairment for most of our lives, you haven't really met your full self. And that's one of the things that I started telling myself when things were most difficult for me, was I'm worth every ounce of effort it takes to love myself, to do this work. And I really firmly believe that every single human being has an absolutely unique gift to share with this world. And that beyond that, even, like, you're worth however much work it takes to help yourself get to that place where you like your life and you're happy to be alive, even when things aren't perfect. You're worth it. Mm-hmm.
Everyone really is.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because everyone that is listening and we are both all worth it.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's such a thing important to hold on to during the journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I know it's funny because even some days when I really struggle, with showing up for myself, like I still have those moments and days, and I have to literally sit there and check in with myself, and from a compassionate place, just say, what's going on? Like, why aren't we showing up today? Because you're worth it. Like I literally have to tell myself that over and over, like, you're worth taking the time out of your day to day. Like, you're worth prioritizing the tools that you need to feel calm and grounded. Like, you're worth it.
Exactly. And it's that repetition again of like believing in ourselves and telling ourselves that eventually, when we act into it, we finally start to feel it. And that's the thing, I think that's such a weird and kind of disorienting, funny experience in this journey, is that a lot of times we tell ourselves these things, but then when you start really acting on it, the thing that you were telling yourself that seemed like, how could that possibly be true? All of a sudden you're like, whoa, that's definitely true. And it's so great. So don't give up. If you've been telling yourself you're worth it and you still don't feel it all the time, anyone out there, like, keep going at it, because as you say it and as you act on it, eventually it'll click in your limbic system. It'll start to make sense and look like it makes sense, instead of being like, why am I telling myself this outrageous lie?
Yeah.
A lot of times that's how it feels when we start saying these things. It's like, really? I don't actually think that's true. But if you act on it enough, eventually the limbic system accepts it. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm so worth it.
Yes. And I think it's a great shift, because there was a point where it was like, oh, it's like the beating yourself up, like, oh my God, I can't believe you're not doing these things. Why aren't you taking care of yourself? Why aren't you doing these things? And it's such a different like place when you can show up and say, hey, you're really worth like prioritizing this. Like, you're worth this. It's like, it's no judgment. There's no shame. It's not like beating yourself up or being mean. It's just saying, like, bringing you back to like what really matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, this has been so much fun.
Yes, it has. I'm so happy we stuck it out.
Yes, I know. Me too. And I relate to so much of what you said, and I love your energy, and I love every message you're sharing with everyone today. And I feel like you're really bringing a gift to anyone listening. And I just wanted to say thank you and acknowledge, you showing up for yourself and being the change that you needed to be in this world, that then has this beautiful butterfly effect on, not only your children and your husband and your family, but like the collective as a whole, and anyone else in recovery that, stumbles upon your work.
Thank you. And that's my hope. And that's one of the reasons I put that stuff out there, is just as kind of, because I think that's something we can strive to be, just like a lighthouse for other people. You can't, one of the things, again, as we sometimes we struggle so much to help ourselves recover. One of the things I've vowed never to do is try to save other people, because it's like, that's not even possible. I mean, I've had a hard enough time trying to save myself. But I think when we just stand tall and keep putting that message out there, the people who are looking will find it. And that's something I'm so grateful for. Like, I think sometimes about every musical artist and every inspirational speaker I've listened to, and all these people. There's been so many people who've played an irreplaceable role in my journey, and they had whatever their whole life story that led them to the point where they gave that talk and recorded it, and it's on YouTube or whatever, and found me at the right moment. And it's like, it's so cool to see how, when we all just stand in our own power and do our own thing, this beautiful kind of puzzle or web of light comes together, and we all can kind of support each other just by doing our own thing.
Yeah, 100%. I love it. I agree. All right, Christina, thank you so much once again. I really appreciate it, and I can't wait to share this conversation with everyone.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
All right, friends, that's a wrap. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's chat. I hope you learned something new, or perhaps just had the reminder you needed, or maybe were inspired in some way to lean more into your authentic truth. Remember that you are worth it. Recovery is possible, and you do have the answers within you waiting to be unveiled. I hope you enjoy your song challenge, and until next time, make this week great.